Hello, and welcome back to the Talking Leadership TV Best Practice Network podcast series. Thank you for joining us again. Our guest today is Glen Fry. Glen founded ESM Australia in 1996 after nearly a decade of experience in the electronics and process control industries. Over the next almost 3 decades, he led the ESM team in delivering automation and motion control systems across various industries. His work has often involved pioneering new and emerging technologies both in Australia and overseas. Glen is the founder of iControls. His pragmatic approach helps Australian manufacturers understand and implement digital systems that optimize and sustain performance. My co-host for the podcast is Kevin Bennett. Kevin is the network facilitator for Queensland of the Best Practice Network, who brings over 30 years of international industry experience. He's implemented a number of operational and business excellence programs across many sectors. Kevin is passionate about bringing together people and processes to grow and build capability and deliver excellence in both customer service and process performance. Our discussion with Glen focused on his leadership experience and insights which he's shared throughout the discussion. But enough from me, I'll hand over to my co-host Kevin to open up our discussion with today's guest, Glen Fry.
Hello and welcome back to this podcast series with Talking Leadership with Eric and Best Practice Network, Kevin Bennett. Hope you're all very well. We are really pleased to be joined by Glen Fry. So Glen, how are you?
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for the opportunity to be here.
That's great. And we are looking forward to it. Eric, how are you?
Good, Kevin. Good to see you again, mate. Looking well. And Glen, thank you for joining us today, mate.
Absolute pleasure.
All right. So as you would have known from these series, we always love to pick out some great presenters to share their leadership journey and leadership insights. And then we reflect on that as we go through the number of podcasts that we've done across these series. So as always, when you've had a chance to have a look, give us some feedback. And if you've got some ideas or want to get involved, then come and join us. So Glen, we've known each other for a few years, and I know you've been a pretty active member of the Best Practice Network and recently presented at our Business Leaders Forum, which was a great insight into your career. So just to get us started, let's just talk through. Now, I've got the beauty, and maybe of others, of seeing some lovely pictures of you when you were younger from the forum up on my screen. But I'll let you explain how you started off and just give us that synopsis of where you started, some key career leverage points, and then just really topping off with the where you are today.
Yeah, well, thanks, Kevin. My introduction to the world of both, I guess, business and management was a little unconventional. My grandfather started an engineering business when he came back from the war. And my father, as a young man, was also a somewhat creative and was always building things, constructing things, and naturally went into the family business as well. So the family business started out building sawmills with my grandfather. My father was, some would say, a very creative, inventive type that used those practical skills from the workshop and his engineering degree to, I guess, change fundamentally some facets of the sugar industry and in Queensland, and also in the shipbuilding industry. So as a family, this entrepreneurial spirit, I suppose, is something that came naturally to me. I was exposed to engineering from as more or less as soon as we could walk. One memory I think that you're referring to, Kevin, is at 5 or 6 years of age, being dragged out of school in my school uniform to go and wander around sugar mills in North Queensland as my father went, this is the good old days, to talk to the chief engineers of those mills and put together a list of things that needed to be done to recover from cyclones. So, I was in factories, in ships, in mines, all sorts of things from a very young age. So I really didn't have a chance. It was always going to be this way.
Great and fantastic. And I think that, again, that's really interesting around the sugar mill. So at that sort of time, you spoke about your dad. So in terms of how how would you explain or give it to his leadership style? Now you reflect on it, and I know you've done a lot. So how would you summarize his leadership style?
Look, I think I learned a lot there. In some instances, with all due respect to my dad, I think I learned a lot of things not to do. But I think I learned a lot more what to do. I mean, different times as well. My grandfather had a reputation for just walking into the workshops on a Monday morning and just firing two guys because that's what he did. And my father would quickly come back and put them back on because they were busy. So, it was that, I guess, that little bit more dictatorial uh, approach to management back in those days. I think my approach to management uh, is somewhat more contemporary. Uh, I think I've become a big believer in, rather than pushing people towards a goal, to putting a North Star out. And we talked about that in that leadership um, talk that I did a few weeks ago, painting a North Star and leading people and encouraging them to take that journey on their own, rather than pushing them in a direction.
Yeah. So picking up on the North Star, because I know it was a major point. So just give a little bit of concept about that, because I'm assuming that, and I know it's not just a go and do your job, go and do it better. And there's a bit of time. So, I know just to explore on what you're understanding and really why that is important in
Yeah,
you.
it's important to me because, well, firstly, I'm intrinsically lazy. So the more I can have people lined up behind me that know the direction that we're going, I have to put less effort into leading them. So it's really about uh, painting that message that people can clearly understand, and surrounding yourself with people that share the vision. So there's kind of a duality there, or a dual importance, the right kind of people, but that right vision as well. And when you've got people that share that vision and understand clearly where that North Star is, we're all pulling together in the same direction. I can go away for 2 weeks and, they tend to continue on in the same direction. And that North Star isn't isolated to just what we're doing in terms of technology. It also is a North Star in terms of ethos. So, people are, when they're confronted with a tricky circumstance, they know what the right thing to do is. Most people intrinsically know what the right thing to do in their gut is. And if they're A, allowed that latitude, and B, they know what the values are, I guess in some instances my value, but what we've said as a company, then, I can be confident that they're going to make good decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. And how does that, I mean, Eric, I think we've come across that a couple of times from a leadership style, being able to share that vision, share that journey, and make it conceptual that people understand, and it gives that track. Your reflections on what you've done before around that topic?
Yeah. So, for what this is worth, I think there's a high degree of trust required if you're going to paint a vision and hope people sign on to it. And from the sounds of it, Glenn, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I get the sense that you trust your people to do their jobs because they're professional people. The risk there is always that if you have complete latitude in your job, then the hope is, as a leader, that the people that you're leading get on and do the work that's required to meet the goal. Because for me, and this is a personal view, some degree of structure is required to get to that end goal. Because complete latitude in a job, you could go off in a direction that you think is acceptable to the person in charge, and suddenly you're going off track a little bit. So I think there's degrees of intervention, and I think the longer you're with a group of human beings and they trust your judgment and they kind of know what you want, it makes that process easier. But that having been said, you get new people or you get someone who's frustrated in a job, it could easily derail things. I've seen it happen. I've been part of teams where that's happened. So there's high degrees of trust required to do what Glenn is talking about, and high degrees of self-confidence in the leadership that you demonstrate. Because in that scenario, from experience speaking to other guests that we've had, Kevin, and in my own podcasting, that um, you get to the point where there is a continuous improvement mindset amongst your team. However, if there is a sense that the leader is absent in some way, then you can have people creating little fiefdoms or creating things that you don't want to happen. So I think the tension for leaders, if this is of any value, is how much structure do you put in, or is it laissez-faire and you just let them run off and hopefully you get to the end point? So hidden hope doesn't work. And I'm sure, Glenn, you haven't done that, but that is a risk. The alternative is you've got a really good trusting team that'll jump on a grenade to stop you getting hurt. And so you want that in the future. You want a team that is protective of you and you of them, but there's a lot of things that need to happen to get to those points. So for me, it's continuous improvement with some degree of structure. I'm not an advocate for being dictatorial or definitely not micromanaging, but without that, I think things can go pear-shaped very quickly.
I agree 100%. And maybe I should have added some context before I launched into that great big, that wonderful North Star idea. Certainly it's a key component for me, and I found it to be very, very, very valuable. For me, I've always specialized in running small high performance teams, so there's a good deal of visibility right between everybody in the team, so you can very quickly see where there's a weak link, and the team will let you know, or they will sort it out themselves if that weak link exists. So I guess that's the first point, and that's one of the things that I learned from those early days. At one time we were building warships for the Australian government. And I say we, it's the family company. So my father was doing that. I was young. I was at high school still at the time, but I was still in the school holidays at the warship factory that as we called it, welding things together. I was doing that sort of stuff. So, but 1,100 people, I never wanted that. Never ever wanted that. I never wanted to have that kind of construct. The feast and famine that goes with having such a large monster. Unions, my goodness, all of that sort of stuff that goes around it. No, not for me. But one of the things that I did learn, probably not soon enough in that leadership journey, is the importance of having very clear PDs, so position description documents, so that people did know what they were. That was part of that North Star, so they knew where they needed to fit within their own role. And one of the key components that I learned about defining PDs was to have the people in those roles have a key in setting their own KPIs. So I wanted them to be involved in setting their KPIs so that they were involved in knowing what good looked like for that role, what good looked like for them. I didn't set the KPIs, maybe some frameworks, but it's important that they have some ownership of that as well. And yeah, so certainly not completely free range, but the importance of that North Star is something that gets everybody headed in the right direction.
There's probably some mix that you've gone down, and no one really will go completely dictatorial or completely no rules at all, because that's just a recipe for disaster. And again, personal reflection, I'm with you that the smaller the team, the better. I could not envisage leading an organization with 1,100 people, because then the difficulty for those that are in strategic leadership roles in the business is you can only really form close relationships with a certain cadre of that 1,100, and then the rest is what does the culture of the place look like. And that, I think, permeates everything that you've been talking about, that if you're going to take the approach that you've taken, which I think is great personally, it's you set the tone and the culture for the place. And if there is a continuous improvement we all kind of know where we're going, and we set our KPIs to get there with some direction, it gives you a lot of ownership of the stuff that you're doing, even though you might not be in a leadership position. And yeah, that takes a bit of guts sometimes to do. And but when it does go wrong, I think with a smaller team, it's easily corrected, or at least easily dealt with amongst the family, so to speak. When it's a larger team, the dimensions of that get a lot trickier, I think, to engage with. And some people do that really well, but some would run a mile from that. And I'm one of those people that would run a mile from a workforce that big.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I agree completely. And time again, I had feedback from people that worked for me that did come from those larger corporate environments that said, it is so great that we can just knock on your door and get a decision made right there and then, and even during the employment process, this is something that people, oftentimes I would have a very informal interviewing process when I was putting people on. It might be fish and chips you know, down at the local fish and chip shop for lunch, and by the end of lunch, I'd already offered them a job. And they said, well, we've applied for 3 other jobs here with these corporate monoliths. And, it's such a process, it's, I, I think that helps from many angles.
Yeah. But there ultimately is an accountability level here. So I just want to cover that back, because where do we stand? It's great to have this, that we build the teams, we set our own KPIs, we'll have this great working relationship. But ultimately, and maybe that's what comes out of the discussion you have with your group, is, in terms of that organization, you're the one that's really accountable here, Glenn. And as much as you want to build this great environment and atmosphere, that level of accountability still has to remain true and front of mind.
The buck stops with me. In a small business, the buck stops with me. There's nowhere else you can go. And that is, I think, something that a lot of people, particularly when they first start business, don't actually comprehend. There is, you can't go to your boss and ask for an extension. You can't go to that's where it stops. If there's a problem, if it's legal, if one of your team members has some kind of medical crisis or family crisis, the buck stops with you. The accountability, so that's the ultimate accountability, right? But those levels of accountability need to be written into those PDs and the KPIs so that people have the ability to understand where they are and measure those. And if we need to refine those on the way through, then that's great. But those lines of accountability, and I guess that's a little bit of a coaching thing for some as they come through that you need to make sure that they're aware that that they're responsible for their patch within the organization. And it's true for a little organization like us, but it's equally true for a larger organization. I'm quite sure. So, we had some interesting case studies where that accountability was self-correcting, right? I used to bring in one of the things I'm proudest of is that I brought a lot of graduates into the business straight out of university with no idea about that accountability other than having to, get an exam or an essay done. They were quite lax when they first came to us. And, they'd turn up at 9 o'clock and you'd have a chat to them and they still continue to turn up at 9 o'clock and, they're clock watching, these sorts of things. And I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. One of the switches that I learned to use very quickly, giving all my secrets away here, was start loading them up with accountability really quickly. Give them a report. And, time and time again, this actually worked the same way as soon as I learned this trick. The minute that you put one of those young graduates into that position of having some responsibility over others and feed them into those lines of accountability, they start to change their own behaviors really quite quickly. So, those graduates that were, coming in a little bit late in the day and maybe not taking things as seriously as they should have, the very minute that they had a young graduate working under them, they're turning up at work early, they're policing these guys, they start feeding them projects and their own little sets of KPIs to meet their own accountability that was built into those roles. So lines of accountability that are driven from those KPIs within well-defined PDs, I think, were the tool that I were the tools that I used.
Yep. No, great. And another big word for you, and I know you used it, was gratitude. So, and you said on the shoulders of giants. So, to just give us a bit of an insight into why that one's really important for you.
So this is something that I learned in those management styles going back, it's pretty easy to throw a few people under the bus here, but there's certainly that style of management that I suggested was pushing people into things. But I remember very clearly my uncle one day, and this is probably, and I would have been 18 years old at the time. My uncle was somebody who was very hands-on, had his own engineering business, and we were standing there, three people along a wash bay, washing our hands after having been in the workshop. It was a mechanical engineering place, and I watched him turn to the guy that was just off the factory floor. I don't know whether he was a labourer or maybe a fitter. He said, "How was your day today?" And the fitter came back with a response, said, "Really good." He said, "Did you enjoy what you did today? Are you enjoying being here?" And the guy said, "Yeah, I really did." And my uncle said to him, he said, "I'm really pleased to hear that." He said, "If there's a time where you don't enjoy being here, you shouldn't." And that was really a big moment for me to understand the importance of making sure that you were, checking in with people at all levels to understand what, if they have a grievance like that, whether they're going to say something or not, I don't know. But if you've got the right open kind of workplace and people don't feel threatened in that workplace, they tend to be, in my experience, pretty open with you. And, from that, one of the things that I've always carried forward was to have those little chats with people from time to time, one-on-one. If somebody's turning up early in the morning, I'll make it my business to go and sit with them before everybody else turns up and say, "Hey, how you going? Is everything going all right?" And get a little bit inside their lives just to see that they are in fact happy with what they're doing. And every afternoon, without fail, if I was in the office, I would do my best to say, "Hey, thanks for turning up today. Thanks for helping with what we were doing." Just being grateful, because we as a business can't succeed unless those people are doing a great job. And as a business owner, it's important that I'm surrounded by people that are happy and want to be there. I don't want it just isn't going to work out if there is conflict or angst among those people. And you can pay people more money, sure, but at the end of the day, people actually want to feel good about what they're doing, and if they don't, money's not going to help you.
No, exactly right. Eric, got some points?
Yeah, just an observation. I guess one of the health markers of most businesses is to get your level of turnover, how many people are deciding to quit and move on to do other things. And it would be interesting when you get that metric. I know where you might go with this, but just hit me up for a sec. That it would be interesting to study the companies that have got very minimal turnover over a certain period of time and compare it with those that don't, and then tease out what were the issues that people raised when they left. Because in some circumstances, people will abandon a job, not give a reason why they left. Some will be very active in giving responses as to why they want to leave a place. And you can never stop people going for whatever reason. But I would suggest to you as as someone who's had some skin in the game for a little while, possibly not as successful as others, but when you see companies where they've got a very low staff turnover, people have been in jobs for a long time, there are some significant reasons why people stay in some businesses. It's not just the safety of getting a paycheck, it's the culture, it's the work environment, it's the fact that it's a secondary family to the one outside of their own family, and it's a place where they can do a job, do it well. And I think most human beings want recognition for the stuff that they do, but also to know that, hey, if you're not happy let me know and we can see what we can do about that. Or if you need to move on, then if I'm hearing you right, you would potentially help someone to move on if they wanted to do something different. Because the last thing you want in a continuous improving team is someone who actively doesn't want to be there, because it just throws a spanner in the works if you're trying to get some stuff done. So sorry I cut you off before. What were you going to say, Glenn?
Um, no, I was just because I did some rough numbers on that. The average tenure over 20 something, nearly 30 years of business was between 6 and 7 years, which I'm actually pretty proud of. I think that's not a bad number. I don't know what the average is in the industry, but 6 to 7, there were people that were, well, the other side of 10 in all of that. And a lot of that was graduate engineers that I brought in and stayed for, stayed for 10 or so years in the business. Several of them have gone on to start up their own businesses, and they did so with my blessing, even though they went into competition with me in some regards. But that's life. That's just how it is. And I certainly, there's not one of them that I would. Uh, Yeah, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, they all handled that incredibly respectfully, as they did that. They went and found other customers in the main, and we never crossed swords. And in fact, in many instances, I've sent those guys, quite a lot of work or referrals or pumped them up in other areas, particularly those that were probably a little bit concerned about that, whether they knew it or not. I'd make recommendations for them because they're great. They were. I say this I say this carefully, I suppose, but they were great kids. They were really good.
Glass half full, Glenn. I think one thing to know when you say to 6 to 7 year average, that's half a decade of your life that you've devoted to a place. And if some were 10 plus years, that's a significant chunk of a career. So that, to me, that sounds great, and it's a testament to an environment that you set up in the workplace, that people engage with that, leaving to do their own thing in a respectful way. Because you'd want to think on their side, they're going, "This is the bloke that gave me a chance. I
Yeah.
I cut my professional chops here. Now I'm going to do my own thing." It's always a difficult conversation to have, and I think all of us have had it at some point. But you're going to get respect if you give respect, and by the sounds of it, you're quite happy for that to happen. And yes, it sucks that you've got new competitors in the market, but if things work out the way that you've just described, people will refer work on between businesses in a similar industry, and it happens in the industry that I work in now. So if you're not a tyrannical piece of what in the dealings with work, then people will want to deal with you, and that's a good thing. So yeah, well done. Sorry, Kevin.
I don't want to make this sound like I'm, God's gift to the employer
Sure,
world, but
sure.
because I've certainly had my dummy spits over the years, let me tell you. Mm.
Let's go on a couple of things that I know are pretty key. So finances. Now you were very clear on your thinking and your structure around financing business and how you made that easy. Just want to share that because I think it's an interesting view, and especially the way you then made it easier for you and the business to operate that way.
Yeah, look, the first decision that I made there was to marry, right? I think I married an accountant, um, that is very much uh, the yin to my yang. So she's very much uh, the structured thinker behind the scenes that was really important part of, helping keep me in line with a lot of those things. But also the approach to business was always one of organic growth. I never wanted to be a business that went out and borrowed money because, that just seems to be, I know and knew right from the start that that was probably the slower way to get going, but I think it's also the most secure and the way that I felt most comfortable moving forwards. So in terms of that, and for a lot of years, I'm very grateful that I had a really good business partner as well, who was also, pretty structured and helpful in, in some of those approaches. You know, I can be maybe a little bit random and less structured than I should be, but you know, you need every good business that I've learned over the years needs that mix, right? You've got the creative type that goes out and does the crazy stuff and takes the risks, and somebody that's really the solid execution person behind the scenes and good with the finances. And my wife Naomi's certainly been that. We always maintained afloat, you know, so the business was always in positive cash flow. Fortunately, we were very careful with the projects that we ran. So, you know, we made good money on the projects, and we managed to keep ahead of it. So, we, you know, very low in bad debts. We chose, you know, we were very careful with how we policed our accounts receivable. And you know, I think that's the secret to success. We weren't paying lots of, you know, we weren't paying lots of interest. We never ever, you know, had an overdraft to service or any of that sort of stuff. If we couldn't afford to do it, we didn't do it. And when it came to marketing or R&D, and we certainly batted well above our weight in R&D and things like that. If we couldn't afford to do it, we just didn't do it, or we, you know, made decisions that allowed us to fulfill the, you know, the strategy objectives. But yeah, that tight fiscal policy around the business, I think, was you know, really important, and that keeps me less stressed, which means that there's less stress on the rest of the people. You know, you know, and that's right through to, you know, making sure that everybody was, you know, well looked after. You know, a paycheck was never missed, for example. There was, you know, bonuses handed out to people at the end of the year, and I was not at all structured about that. It was you know, benevolent gifts. You know, we basically just look at the money in the bucket at the end of the year and divvied that up with the staff. You know, so they always went home with something at Christmas, and they always went home with something at the end of the financial year.
And I think you also said you got quite used into the automation reports dashboarding, which I know was a lot of the ignition side you were doing. So, you know, what's if you're a business leader, what's, you know, just reinforcing what's the importance of being able to know what's going on?
Look, I probably wasn't as good at looking at those. We used Xero for that, so I obviously would keep an eye on what was going on with Xero. But I had a very uh, accurate and loud warning system in my wife, who looked at that very closely. And you know, I guess when you're in a small business, things are a little bit um, you know, a little bit more visibility, I suppose. So, you know, we can talk about that, you know, over the breakfast table, for example, and know where we are with where we are. And because it's a small business and I'm involved in the quoting, I'm involved in a lot of the invoicing and the sales, and I see how busy the guys are. You know, you get a pulse of what's going on in the business, because it's Eric, you said it, it's a tight-knit community. I know that the guys are engaged. I know that they're busy. I know that we're doing stuff. So, you know, through those lines of accountability, whether a project's on track and where we are with the profitability of a business through a range of different metrics, not just the straight up financial metrics. I don't know. Does that make sense?
No, and I think it's a pretty clear message, and you know, being able to understanding how you want to run, and I think it's that ripple effect, as we said, about being in control, even though it may be tight sometimes. Being in control is less stressful, in the way it comes across, and that ripples through the rest of the business. And just being able to have those conversations, whether it's your wife or your accountant or whoever, but having those and being early and earlier picking up and do it. Because I think that leads to the next point is about decision making.
Maybe, Kevin, can I just add one point there that I think is probably actually a very important point? I've never been focused on money. I'm not money driven, because it's been my fundamental belief through all of these journeys that we're going out there to solve some problems and build things for people. If we do a really good job of doing that, if we solve the problems and we do it in the best possible way, that will build on our success. So people will want to come to us because we're delivering great projects. And if we're doing those things in the right way, the money will come.
Yeah.
It's not about looking at dashboards and saying, hey, our turnover's down or our margin's down.
Yeah.
It's the wrong approach. The right approach, I have always believed, is let's do the absolute best that we can and the money will come.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a, you know, that seems very backward if you were in the US, for example.
Yeah. Eric, any thoughts around that one?
Yeah, I was going to ask, and it puts my mind back to some conversations I've had with entrepreneurs in my other podcasting. Do you make it a feature of your business practice that you will reject potential clients if you think they're going to be difficult to work with? So you're not just known for the work you take in, but that you're particular about the kind of clientele you get involved with, without naming
100%.
names, obviously.
Absolutely. I've done it time and time again. And that would be why we, in 30 years of business, only had one project that went wrong. I smelt that it was going wrong before we even took the project on. I knew it was going to go wrong, but we took it on. We recovered in the end, so we got our payday in the end, uh, which in itself is quite an interesting story. But absolutely, absolutely. Even just as we were going through the sale process, there was a very big juicy project coming up, and I just didn't want a bar of it. And I actually handed it. I didn't hand this one, but I did recommend that one of the young fellas that worked for me that had the right risk profile and the right cost profile to be able to, you know, the overhead profile to be able to deal with that project, took that on, which he did. And he did a great job of it. But yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, it makes sense given the strategy that you've just outlined. Again, I won't ask for details, but if it's a smaller, not smaller, a slower organic growth, and you're particular about the companies that you deal with as potential clients, and you're not driven by the money, but you want to deliver quality outcomes, I think that permeates in your culture so that your people will know when you reject something. It's not necessarily driven by the dollars, because there could be some massive dollar projects you could get involved with that could go pear-shaped very significantly. And if that has a detrimental impact on the business, you put at risk everyone who works for you, not just your own business. So those as drivers, I think, are important. And I wish more companies did that, because I would hazard a guess that many small businesses that go under didn't test the clientele, or didn't do their due diligence, if I can use the right word, and suddenly they're in deep, you know what, and they can't get out of it. And so, and that comes from a long time in that business world. So obviously you've learned something from your own travels, and potentially others that you've worked with, maybe your dad and your uncle and others that maybe had got into some not so good relationships with others. And yeah, it's a testament, I think, to good practice that you should be known by the clients you take on, and those that and the work that potentially you reject, to keep your own integrity and potentially the health of the business going.
Well, and the health of your employees as well, because, you know, if those projects turn to putty, you know, you might have a great relationship, but for their own, you know, for their own reasons, you could lose good people as a result of taking on crappy projects, and that doesn't help anybody.
Yep. Yep. So that's going to take us into some interesting things around decision making. And I know you picked this one up, Glenn, about the good old 80-20 rule. And you quoted Churchill at the time, perfection is the enemy of progress. So do you want to just talk around that philosophy for you?
Yeah, goodness, I even remember where I was handed that. You know, I've seen so many people, even family members, suffer paralysis through analysis, you know. And that is, and the funny thing is, the smarter you are, often the worse that is. So maybe that says something about me that I jump in boots and all. Um, um, yeah, look, I guess it's that realization that you get to a point in your career. Some people get there sooner than later. That when you're confronted with a difficult position, that your first instinct is to analyze or dwell. That, you know, I know now that probably 80 to 85% of the time when I'm confronted with a situation, that my gut instinct is going to get me pretty close to the bullseye. It's not going to work every time, but I've also learned that most of the time that's actually good enough, because on the way there, hopefully we're going to be clever enough as a team to be able to pull ourselves into the right spot or to solve the problem and just get the job done. And so many times I see people that just kind of stall at the gate, never actually start a project, never actually start an R&D project or get a product delivered, or just make really important decisions in their business because um, of the risk profile. You just got to jump and be prepared to be prepared to accept that you're going to have to fix some stuff.
Yeah. Yep.
Can I just, for the record, Glenn, and I've been thinking about this for a little while. Again, this is a personal observation that I'm always fascinated when somebody in the business world says to me, "Oh, my gut instinct helps me 85% of the time." It's not gut instinct, and it's definitely not guesswork. It's based on your own experience in the world of work. So it's driven by experience, data that you've collected over time, and all that stuff. I think, however your brain processes this, that gives you a picture going, yes, no, run a mile, and you go with the best decision that you can, and hopefully that gets you over the line. Now, if that doesn't necessarily go the way that you need it to go, you've got potentially a team that you can rely on, your wife who's involved in the business, to go, this is where I think the decision I need to make. What's your feedback? Do you use that? Do you test your decision making with others in your team that are in a leadership position, or is it ultimately you that makes the call?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You can't, um, I think you'd go insane if you made these kind of decisions entirely in isolation. I test it with employees, I test it with engineers, I test it with Naomi, absolutely. I might even test some of these decisions with other colleagues around the world. I am so fortunate. I'm just back from the US, but I have such a vast network to be able to reach out to and say, "Hey, I'm jumping into this. What do you think?" Or "I'm about to do this. What do you think?" And it could be a text message or a quick Teams call, or yeah, of course. But the buck still stops with me, right? So that's the other part of it. And you I don't know everything. I try to be everywhere, but I don't know everything.
But we should steal that quote, Kevin. The buck stops with me. Yeah, ultimately, if you decide to lead something, then yeah, it has to be your call. At the end of the day, hopefully, most leaders are actually drawing on their resources to help do that. Now, that said, I'm not saying that in every situation you're going to have the time to do all that deep dive consulting and due diligence, but you're talking about the big decisions on the daily when you've got things that just need to be decided on. I think you build up a set of experiences that help you out, and I've seen it in workplaces where that goes well, and other times even with minor decisions that you don't think will personally affect you, sometimes the consequences of decisions will affect your team, and that's when being able to go, before I take a step, is this going to piss someone off on the team, or am I going to put someone's nose out of joint? And for that couple of seconds of reflection before you make the call, you can save yourself a lot of grief down the track. Because I've thought about this for a little bit, that the decisions we make as leaders, we look at from a perspective, but sometimes we don't get in the shoes of the people that have to wear that decision, to go, well, what does this mean for the people that I'm potentially working with? And I think if we did more of that, you might save yourself some grief. Now, you can't do it all the time, but I think it's good to maybe put yourself in the shoes of your team when you're making decisions, because at times those decisions are going to have a material effect on the
There's an
people
ex
that you rely on. Yeah.
there's an extension to that too, Eric. Sometimes you need to make those decisions that are going to make them uncomfortable because that's how they grow.
Mhm. Yeah, which is back to that environment you talk about. And I know we've spoken about, the team, the three A's, and we're going to come back to the three A's at the end there, Glenn, because I think they're pretty important. You talked about clear lines of accountability, PDs, and setting the KPIs. But I know when we spoke about the environment, it's very family first, which I know you're a big believer in. And it's also, acknowledging that the group of people you're working with, the graduates in your case, they love playing with tools and technology. It stimulates them by having that right environment and things to do. Any more thoughts? And the other thing was about the slow to hire type process. And I know it's been quite a big issue with a lot of people I've been talking around the network is, people seem to be just taking that, and they know they shouldn't have taken on some hires because they just needed feet on the ground. But people are really either living with that pain at the minute. I know there's a few people legally who are living with that pain at the minute. But when you've got that right thinking, just having that right person coming in, setting them up right, and then bringing them along and to be part of that family, that community, just ticks the three boxes. And I think you're very strong around those, aren't you?
Yeah, so the three that you're referring to, the three A's, are the attitude, aptitude, and ability. And they're the things that I look for in hires. Um, Typically, I'm not so interested in what they've done at high school or what they've even done in university, really. I'll have a chat to them about what they want to do, where their interests lie, their background. Sometimes some of the best engineers that I've had have got pretty mediocre uni results, but in their spare time, they're building cars or they're building this or they're doing something with their hands. So their interests are in the right kind of area. The last thing that you want to do is be employing somebody that has come through an electrical engineering degree because, well, that was the course that I qualified for, so I got the results. I want somebody that's building ham radios. I want somebody that's dabbling with home automation, that's coding stuff at home, because that's what they're building apps or doing something like that. They're the guys that you want as a part of the team. So, that ability, that aptitude, they're the ones that you want. I've actually found that the guys and gals that get the really best marks at university often aren't as good at solving problems. That might sound crazy, but if they are confronted with a really hard problem and they decide that it can't be solved, well, they just tend to throw their hands up in the air and, with that, well, I'm clever and I can't do this, so therefore it's impossible kind of attitude, right? I'd much rather a scrapper that is going to be out there, with a problem to solve in a factory like I was, at 2 a.m. sitting on top of a bucket or a cable drum, programming a machine, trying to get something to go because it had to be going at 5 a.m. to meet a production schedule. Those are the kind of attitudes and aptitudes that I'm interested in working with.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I just want to go into, so we're talking about your team and the environment, but what about you? So in terms of your own leadership development, I know you do a lot of travel for work and for personal, and networking, things like that. So how do you keep yourself stimulated? How do you keep yourself grounded? And what's really working for you? Especially you're obviously into a new venture, which we'll cover off right at the end.
Well, I'm pretty chuffed to hear that you think that I'm grounded. I'm pretty sure there's a few people that would suggest that I'm not. Yeah, look, for me, leadership takes a few different roles, or a few different avenues. For me, there's that technical leadership, and there's that human leadership or that visionary kind of leadership. For me, they kind of go hand in hand because I'm a nerd or a geek at heart. I love nothing more, and I think this has been part of our success of, and maybe speaks a little bit to the standing on the shoulders of giants, right? I've traveled extensively to the US and to Europe to understand what the emerging technologies are in those more advanced markets. and bring that back to Australia to get a little bit of a head start here to set us apart. So that's proven itself time and time again, particularly with strategies like digital transformation, Industry 4, all those kind of messages that are still pretty confused here.
Yep.
You know, going back 7 or 8 years, the government already had was asking me to go and talk on those kind of subjects to other manufacturers around the place to bring those messages, which gives you some pretty unique opportunities to be in front of industry leaders and hear from them directly, but also to develop your own set of skills around that and around, use those skills to shape around the market requirements here in Australia. So really important, and I still do that today, which is why, this new venture that I've got, E42, where I'm building a platform to automate emissions calculations. The approach that we're taking is very different to anything else in the market that I've been able to see. But I also understood that by being in those other markets, not just the importance of these emission reporting requirements, they're mandatory emissions reporting requirements now, but what's required and how to fit that into some of these European structures so that when they do appear here in Australia, I've got something that's ready to help lower the compliance burden for manufacturers here in Australia. But I've also got 660 or 700 million people in Europe as a target market for this product that I'm building. So, hopefully we're a little ahead of the curve there. That might help us see, it's not guaranteed, but it might help us get some traction and some success in those markets. So I guess that's, for me, that technical leadership that transpires down into the rest of the teams, that I'm able to bring that to my people and show them a little bit of what's going on. So there's that leadership in opening up different lines of materials and information that educate them on the way through. So I spend a lot of my time educating my teams in these things because I bring that back, educate my teams. They're typically well ahead of the curve. In terms of leadership, I think that's mostly through analysis. It's mostly looking at the successes and failures of other leaders and being somebody that has been involved in these digital transformation projects with industry in Australia and in other parts of the world. When you do those projects, we're not just taking the companies on that journey. We're not just applying technology. You actually have to get in and understand those businesses, as well as the businesses themselves understand those processes to be able to digitally transform those processes. And anybody that's interested in, the psychology of business and the way that the business works would understand that, well, there's an awful lot of change management that goes there. You need to be involved as well in the people side of the business to understand what's going to work, what's not going to work, which involves you getting inside the heads of some of those managers to understand. So for me, I guess that's a lot of what I've fed off over the years, working with customers, understanding what's worked, what's not worked in the businesses that we've served.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Fantastic. I'm going to think we're good. You believe we're coming to the hour near enough already in the way that it goes. So we know it happened. So let's just talk about, and I know you cover this off, Glenn, in right at the end, and I don't know whether you've got your slide there around about your key tips for leaders. And I know we've covered a number of those off. If you've got, do you want to just run through those just to close up?
You're expecting that I was prepared.
Well, I was a little bit. Definitely was a little bit. Didn't I set that expectation?
Yeah. So I've got the slide in front of me. The key tips that I identified was that it's really all about the people. Everything that we do in a business is about the people that work with us. And that's an important distinction. These people don't work for me. I work with them. For me, that's always been a very big part of what we do. I'm not the, I think on that first slide, I think I used the term, I'm not the boss of you. We're in this together. Important to ask questions and, ask questions of your people in your business. And that also extends to when you're doing a project, when we're working on these complex projects, the solutions to the problems that we're trying to solve are usually already at the factory floor level. They're usually not further up the channel than that. I've always made it my business to be very connected to people at the shop floor level, even to be able to speak their language down at that level.
Yep.
Listening to your gut, that 80-20 rule, that, I never expect that I'm going to be perfect and that my people are going to be perfect. You just have to take that mindset of being better than you were yesterday. I think that's critical. The buck stops with me, it can't go anywhere else. I'm ultimately accountable for what my people are doing, what we're doing as a team, but there's no one else to go to in the business, I have to fix it. If a customer has a problem, I'm the one that has to get involved and sort it out. I can't go anywhere else. I can't pass that off to someone else. Get help. Don't think that you can do it all yourself. And don't try and reinvent wheels, because, people have been down these design paths that there's just no point trying to do everything yourself. Sometimes you're cutting new ground, sure, and we've been in that position, luckily, but reinventing wheels doesn't help anybody. Take holidays. I can't underestimate, or I can't oversell how crap I've been at taking holidays over the years. That's a double-edged sword. I know that I get frazzled, and I've got, a wonderful wife and others around me over the years that have said, take him away. He needs to go somewhere else. So, it's kind of sad that I get to that point, but it really is, because it does give me an opportunity to reset, retarget, and make better decisions when I'm better rested, and see the trees for the forest, I suppose, when I'm away from the noise. The other point was never ever stop learning. I've just been in the US for 2 weeks. I can't tell you the lessons that I've learned just by being in the US for 2 weeks around much more clever people than me, about new technologies, about new concepts that are going to have us stand apart. And the other thing that I think is very important, and it's the last one that I've got on the list, is when the passion goes, so should you. If you're not passionate about what you're doing, don't do it. I don't think you're going to be effective at it. And that employs, for me as a business owner, if I'm not passionate about it, luckily I'm in that position that I do what I love because I love what I do, or the other way around, whichever way that works. But it's kind of wrapped up inside itself. But it's the same for the people that are working with you. If they're not passionate about what you're doing, about that North Star, and about the direction that they're going in, you don't want them working with you. They're better off going somewhere else. You're better off having them go somewhere else.
Yeah, no, great point, and I think you've summed that up really well. And I think we've explored all of those in this last hour as well. So Eric, I think we're into that last couple of thoughts, last couple of takeaway type phase. So I'm going to put you on the spot now, and then we'll allow them to come off. So from our just always lots we take away from these: reaffirming, reestablishing, calibrating, and we love the personal stories here. So what's resonated with you then, Eric?
Yeah, so a couple of observations, if I may. I like the list. It sort of covers off, in my mind, the things that good leaders should be thinking about with their people, irrespective of the type of business that they run. I'm happy that you mentioned taking time for yourself to reset, because I think as much as we try, and there's value in knowing when you need a break, sometimes you need other people to give you a kick in the backside to go, look, you need to go away from here for a while. We're sick of looking at you. You're not your optimal self. Get out of here and go have a break. I think more people should have friends around them that do that, because when you hit burnout, it's not that you lose passion for something. It's that you have no more energy to commit to having a clear head. And I've seen too many people do that and not realize that they're in that space and they're burnt out almost completely, to the point where making good decisions, even about how you fix the problem, can be difficult.
Impossible, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting too that before, not with that list, but you mentioned that use your network. I think if you can create a network as you go through the many careers you might have, and in your case, you've run your business, but for those of us who are in multiple careers, having that network of people you can reach out to is critically important to check your thinking, or just reach out and say, I need help. That's important, not just from a business sense, but from a psychological health point of view. It's good to have those people in your network that'll reach out and go, "How are you going?" Not in the business, but how are you going? That's a critical distinction. A good friend of mine pointed that out to me, that when you reach out to your network, is it always about the business, or is it about asking how they are? And that mental health discussion, I think, is more important than
Absolutely.
people give it credit for. And finally, the making sure that your team is good with where you're going and checking in with each other is important as well. Easier to do if the team is smaller, but you can take that lesson that you've shared and apply it to any business in the team that you're managing. So they're my observations, Kevin. So thank you for that, Glenn. That was great.
No, it was a fantastic, and that's I've had the opportunity of obviously working with Glenn, but also looking through that list. I love it in the terms it's a very personal list, but for me, it's one of those lists that almost everyone can look back and go, yeah, oh yeah, okay, yeah. And I think picking up on your point, so totally concur there, Eric, is the ask questions. And I know on your slide, you then had in brackets, listen to your people. So it's ask the questions, but listen to what they're saying back as well, and be willing to accept what they're saying. Because, whether that's to take a holiday or no, actually, Glenn, it's not the right thing to be doing, or, those type of things are important. The talk about the being accountable and ultimately, but it doesn't, that being the accountable is great, but that accountability flows through the organization, and you're part of making that happen. The gratitude, along the journey, I think is, and the gratitude for the life you've got, for the work you've got, for the people you work with, and the outcomes you've achieved. You're changing lives here, you're making things better, and be grateful you can be part of that. So a lot around the people in the team, totally concur with. And we mustn't forget we've got our own personal learning and sharing to do as well, because that can become a barrier if we're not careful either. And whether that's just going and chatting with a group somewhere, going overseas, or just going tapping into a few people that you can just have a good open conversation, or just go somewhere you've never been before and meet a group you've never even known and just start to have a conversation can be just as important there. So nice, a lot of fantastic, great takeaways there, Glenn. Any just last thoughts before we close off from you, Glenn, you want to share, or things that may have just gone, oh, I know I've said about that?
Um, yeah, look, I guess these are things that I think have worked for me. I'm not going to pretend for a minute that I've got them perfect. I've made, I think when we started down this road, Kevin, I think if I was to sum up what I've become best at, it's fixing mistakes over the years. It's not doing this stuff. It's fixing the boo-boos that I've made along the way to do it, which has learnt this, and I guess that's that not I'm not going to be perfect, just got to be better than yesterday. So
Yeah.
look, all I can say is I'm grateful for the opportunity to do this. And just in doing this itself, it's been quite cathartic to put the process down on paper in a presentation to be able to present. So I hope it's been helpful to others.
I'm sure it will have been. And if anyone wants to reach out to Glenn on LinkedIn, please do so. And and reach out with his new venture, or just what he's been involved with before. And the same with Eric and the Talking Leadership podcast series, and obviously the Best Practice Network. So with that, I'm going to bring this fantastic session to a close. We did say time goes quick, and it does really when we're doing these. So big thank you, Glenn, and
Pleasure.
looking forward to keeping in contact with you. And we're going to see you next week as well. Eric, always a pleasure. Thank you very much. We love your insights, and we love your reflections on these podcasts and how they go. And for all of those of you who listen, you'll see these go out via the different channels. Please enjoy them. We've got a whole range of them now. and we always want your feedback. So with that, I'm going to bring this Talking Leadership Best Practice Network podcast series to a close. We thank you for everyone who's involved. We thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you.